How do you even begin to understand a text that's at the heart of a faith for over 1 billion people, especially when its own scholars say it's incredibly complex? Well, today, we're diving into the Qur'an, but we're going to do it through the eyes of one of its most fascinating modern interpreters, Muhammad Asad. Okay, let's get into it.
So, right out of the gate, Asad himself makes this incredible statement. In the foreword to his life's work, he says the Quran is, in the end, untranslatable. Now, wait a minute. That sounds like a crazy starting point for a guy who's about to translate it, right? It's this paradox that really sets the stage for everything he's trying to do.
And that really leads us to the big puzzle here. If the book itself is fundamentally untranslatable, how on earth is its message supposed to reach a modern, global audience that doesn't speak Arabic? This is the exact problem that Asad dedicated his life to solving.
And here's his answer. See, Assad's goal was never to just create a simple word-for-word copy of the Quran in English. He knew that was totally impossible. His mission was different. He wanted to be a guide, to make the message inside the text truly understandable for anyone. And that shift in purpose? It changes everything.
So how did he pull it off? Well, the very first step was this deep dive into the language itself. And we're not just talking about finding equivalent words. No, this was about getting to the very soul of classical Arabic.
Let's just take one of the most basic building blocks of the text. Most translations use the word verse when they see the Arabic term ayah. But Asad says, hang on, a better way to think about ayah is as a message or a sign. Now that might sound like a tiny detail, but it completely reframes how you read the book. Suddenly, it's not just a collection of poems, it's a series of profound, divine messages, each one pointing you toward a greater truth.
And here you can really see the layers he was working with. Take a word like sahar. Literally, it just means that quiet time right before dawn. But metaphorically, it can also mean the core of the heart. You can immediately see how choosing one meaning over the other could totally change the feeling and the lesson of a passage.
Now, Asad wasn't just making this stuff up. His work stands on the shoulders of giants, the great Arab language experts and classical scholars like Zamakhshari and Ibn Kathir. But, and this is key, he also believed that our understanding can't be frozen in time. He argued that as human knowledge expands, new layers of meaning within the Quran can be uncovered, which means sometimes his interpretations would actually differ from the classics.
So all this deep language work feeds right into his next huge principle. You just can't get the message if you don't understand the world it was revealed in. For Muhammad Asad, context is absolutely king.
The Quran is just packed with references to specific moments in history. So, to help us make sense of it, Assad's notes are filled with context about things like the political drama in Medina, the chaos of the Battle of Uhud, or even the ancient story of Pharaoh and the Israelites. He shows us these aren't just little details. They're totally essential to grasping the point.
But here's the brilliant part. For Asad, these specific events aren't just history lessons. He argues that every single one of them holds a universal, timeless moral truth. So, the story of a battle from 1400 years ago suddenly becomes a lesson about faith and courage for anyone, anywhere, at any time.
And he applies this exact same logic to his approach to Quranic law. He doesn't present it as just a list of random rules. Instead, he sees it as a system that's designed to align perfectly with our fundamental human nature, as a continuation of the ethical guidance that's been offered to humanity throughout all of history.
Okay, so what about the parts of the text that aren't so straightforward? The parts that aren't meant to be taken literally. This next pillar of his method tackles how you interpret the symbolic, the metaphorical, the allegorical.
Asad, actually taking his cue from the Quran itself, breaks its messages into two main types. First, you have the ayat muhkamat. These are the really clear, direct statements, mostly about law and the core beliefs. But then, you've got the ayat mutshabihit. These are the allegorical ones, the ones that are dealing with realities way beyond what we can see or touch, like the nature of God or the concept of the afterlife.
Let's make this real with an example. The famous story of the golden calf. In Assad's view, the point isn't just about something that happened a long time ago. No, the calf becomes this powerful symbol for a timeless human weakness, our tendency to worship material things, to get caught up in wealth and stuff. It's a spiritual trap that's just as relevant today. And all of this brings us to the final, really grand theme in Assad's work. This idea that the Quran isn't some standalone book that came out of nowhere. He sees it as the final chapter in a single, continuous story of divine guidance for all humanity.
Asad really stresses that the Qur'an sees life and revelation as this organic, unfolding process. So the guidance given to Abraham, the law given to Moses, the spiritual message of Jesus, they're all part of the same connected story, the same historical flow that finally culminates in the message of the Qur'an.
This is such a beautiful line from the Qur'an, and it really captures this worldview. The idea is that religion isn't some separate part of your life you keep in a box. It's the hue, it's the color, the texture that gives meaning to everything. It's a universal framework for living an ethical life, and it's for everyone.
So when you put it all together, the deep dive into language, the focus on context, the understanding of allegory, and its idea of a continuous story, what do you get? You get a message from the Qur'an that is profoundly rational, deeply ethical, and speaks to all of humanity. A message that builds on what came before, rather than replacing it.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. Asad's work isn't just about understanding the Quran, it's really a masterclass in how to interpret any ancient text. It makes you ask yourself, how does really understanding the method, the how behind an interpretation, change the way we see these ancient sources of wisdom, whether they're religious, philosophical, or historical?